It was the year 594 BC, and the city of Athens wavered on the edge of anarchy. The gulf between the rich and the poor of the city had grown so wide, and the resentful hardships of many so fierce, that utter breakdown seemed inevitable. Wealthy landowners had reduced countless Athenian citizens to a condition little better than serfdom, with debt and enslavement facing those who failed to surrender 1/6 of their yield as tax. The social fabric of the city was tearing at the seams, year by punishing year. And so, in an act of last resort, the community of Athens agreed to something remarkable. They handed over power to a single man and gave him the mandate to fix it. This supreme lawgiver of early Athens, as he came to be known and celebrated among later generations, was named Solon. And his sweeping reforms of Athenian economic life, though far from unchallenged, ushered in the democratic spirit that would come to define his city forever. To see what made Solon's appointment so extraordinary, the origins and growth of Athens in ages past reveals the long and tangled road by which the city arrived in crisis. In earliest memory, Athens began as a kingdom, whose rulers were figures of myth and legend, heroes, demigods, men with the bodies of serpents. Most famous among them was Theseus, the slayer of the Minotaur, who as king of Athens was credited with the unification of Attica's scattered villages under the common command of one city. After the time of kings came the age of the archons, elite magistrates elected or appointed to govern. In the early system, 3 archons shared power as the head of the Athenian state: the eponymous archon, who presided over civic and household administration, the polemarch, who commanded the military, and the archon basileus, who inherited the religious duties of the monarchy for sacred rites and ancient ceremonial. 6 more officials, the thesmothetai, were added later, bringing the total body to 9. These oligarchs came exclusively from the so-called Eupatridae, the well-born of Athens' oldest noble families. For most of this early history, real power belonged solely to those aristocratic clans, and most citizens had little say in the city's affairs. But the imbalances inherent in this system were clear to see, and actions were taken. The first major reform came from a legislator with a reputation for grim justice. Around 620 BC, an Athenian named Draco rose to codify Athens' legal customs, which until then had existed as unwritten traditions, still subject to the whims of those in power. Draco wrote down laws to fix them in text, and in doing so, made them public and binding. But his laws were notorious for the severity of their penalties. Nearly any offense, from murder down to theft, was punishable by death. As one Athenian famously remarked centuries later, Draco had written his laws for Athens not in ink, but in blood. The Athenians kept Draco's codes for a generation, but many recognized the absence of justice in these laws, and the social strife between aristocrats and commoners reached new heights of intensity. And so, when the governing archons in 594 BC finally turned to Solon, they were not merely asking him to tinker at the edges of an old system. Athens needed a new body of laws, built from the remains of the old. According to tradition, Solon was born around 638 BC to a family of middling noble status. He had spent much of his adult life as a merchant and a poet, sailing the Mediterranean, composing verse, and building a reputation as a man of unusual wisdom and moral seriousness. He was not rich enough to be counted among Athens' most powerful, but not poor enough to be dismissed as a man with nothing to lose. Respected by both sides, he was beholden to neither. The Athenians invested him with the title and power of a sole archon, becoming the city's highest and only chief magistrate, and gave him extraordinary powers to reshape the laws as he saw fit. Among his first acts was the so-called seisachtheia, the shaking off of burdens. With a single stroke, Solon cancelled all debts held against a person's freedom or land. Athenians who were subject to pay a sixth of their livelihood were released from obligation, and those sold into slavery were to be brought home at public expense. The practice of debt slavery was abolished and forbidden once and for all. And Solon described these transformative acts in poetic verses he wrote by his own hand. Poetry, for Solon, became an important means of publicizing and explaining his ideas as a form of public argument to address the community and defend his choices before the eyes of history. Much of his poetry was passed down and continued to inspire thinkers and dreamers throughout antiquity and beyond. Yet, as the way of politics goes, the choices he made drew fire from every quarter. Both wealthy and poor found reasons for contempt. The former resented the cancellation of their debts. The latter were outraged that the landowners' estates had not been broken up and redistributed to the people. Solon described himself as a shield for both poor and rich, an advocate for neither side, but the guardian of an Athens where citizens of all standing had a legitimate place. In his vision, equality under law ensured the same rules for all, and no faction could use the machinery of state to crush another. Though he deeply changed his city, Solon was not a revolutionary. He had been approached by many to become a tyrant, to seize power for keeps, and rule by decree, championing the people's cause. And he had refused. But while hewing to the center, his reforms were profound and wide-ranging. He reorganized the citizenry into 4 classes based on agricultural production, allowing men of even modest means to participate in public life and serve on juries. He established a new popular assembly open to all free male citizens regardless of class. He reformed the courts so that any citizen could bring a case on behalf of another, since an offense done to one Athenian was an offense against all. From Draco's fearsome law codes, he kept only the laws against homicide, sweeping away nearly everything else. When he had finished his reforms and his powers as sole archon had been spent, Solon did something none would have expected. He left Athens behind. Knowing that if he remained in Athens, he would face endless pressure from every faction to bend or reverse his laws, he announced that he would travel abroad for 10 years, on the condition that, in his absence, his legislation must remain untouched. During these years, as a wandering sage across the Mediterranean world, he was said to have visited Egypt and Cyprus, and eventually the court of the Lydian king Croesus, a man of fabulous wealth. While in Lydia, according to a well-known tale from the historian Herodotus, the rich king Croesus famously put the question to the wise Solon: who, in his view, was the happiest man in the world? Proud of his immense treasures, Croesus expected to hear his own name, but instead Solon put forward a humble Athenian citizen named Tellus, who had lived well, seen his children flourish, and died honorably in battle for his city. Croesus was enraged, but Solon's point was clear. However glittering it may be, wealth without virtue or a full life lived well means nothing. No one should be judged as truly happy until their life is finished. Back in Athens, however, the city Solon had left behind was beginning to crack. Eventually, the aging sage returned to his homeland, to weather the criticisms of his laws as political life in Athens ground on. And it is here that a new chapter of the story begins, with a new challenger entering the scene. For all their virtuous moderation, Solon's body of reforms had not resolved the underlying tensions between classes. Athens was still ruled by powerful aristocratic clans, by regional factions, by ancient grudges. The elite resented what they had lost, and the poor felt they had not gained enough. Within this atmosphere of simmering discontent, a new star was rising, young and charismatic, but possessed of a fierce ambition that even Solon could not have anticipated. His name was Peisistratus, and in one of history's greatest ironies, his insatiable craving for power helped secure the fragile success of Solon's reforms. Peisistratus was born around 607 BC into a noble family with roots in the eastern hill country of Attica, populated mostly by poor farmers and laborers. He was brilliant, magnetic, and possessed of a charm that made ordinary people feel that he was one of them. He had served with distinction as a general in Athens' war against the neighboring city of Megara, returning home with military glory. He knew how to work a crowd, how to tell a story and turn a phrase, and he had learned well that in Athens' fragmented landscape, the path to supreme power lay in championing the cause of the dispossessed. Peisistratus was well known to Solon, who watched his ascent with mounting alarm. According to Plutarch, the lawgiver openly warned the Athenians, arguing that they could see each individual step toward tyranny clearly enough, but were failing to grasp where those steps were leading them. The Athenians, charmed by Peisistratus and caught up in their own rivalries, ignored his words, and even his powerful verses fell on deaf ears. He could only look on as history took its course. The decisive moment came around 561 BC. Peisistratus arrived in the Agora, the great marketplace and civic heart of Athens, with bloody wounds on his body and a harrowing story. He had been viciously attacked by his enemies, he claimed, only for daring to speak up for the people. No citizen's free speech was safe, he loudly warned, if championing the cause of justice was answered with violence, and he was but the first example. The assembly of Athens was moved by his apparent plight, not realizing, as later historians did, that Peisistratus had staged all of it. But his mastery of political theater paid off. To secure the protection that he so clearly needed, the assembly voted him a bodyguard of 50 club-bearing men, in effect, his own small militia, fully legal and loyal to him. The pieces had fallen into place, and Peisistratus's true plan was revealed. With his personal bodyguard surrounding him, Peisistratus marched upon the Acropolis and seized the core institutions of the city. With this stroke, he had at last fulfilled his ambitions and quickly installed himself as ruler of Athens. Peisistratus the Tyrant was born. And yet, for all his cunning deception and appetite for power, he would be remembered positively in the annals of history. In Greek political terminology, the word tyrannos, or tyrant, carried no determined moral quality. It denoted someone who had taken power through extra-legal means, but did not comment on how they ruled for good or ill. And so, while appropriately titled a tyrannos, Peisistratus the tyrant was not at all a cruel or lawless master of Athens. Once in power, he proved to be a remarkably capable and popular ruler, and most crucially, he upheld and secured Solon's new laws, ironically fostering the democratic spirit in Athens that those laws advanced. Never losing sight that his power came from the support of the people, he was careful to project the image of a man governing in their interest and delivering results. He provided loans to farmers to buy equipment and seed, created a body of traveling judges who brought law to the countryside, established the Panathenaic Games as a spectacular civic festival every 4 years, instituted the city Dionysia rituals in honor of the god Dionysus, where theatrical performances would be staged every spring, and launched a grand building program on the Acropolis, laying early groundwork for the eventual site of the Parthenon. Under his rule, Athens grew wealthier, more vibrant, and more prestigious across the Greek world, endowed with a new reputation for sophistication and artistic achievement that would endure for millennia. Among later generations, whether Peisistratus was a good man and a model citizen was a matter of debate, but he was, by virtually any measure, a successful leader of Athens. Solon, by now very old, did not live to see the full arc of what Peisistratus would build. Plutarch records that in his final years, when Peisistratus came to visit him and treated him with special respect and courtesy, Solon received the tyrant appropriately, but not warmly. Surely, in his wisdom, he had reckoned with the nature of tyranny, and tyranny it remained, however benevolent it appeared. A place where laws and institutions existed only at one man's pleasure was no free city. For all his general popularity, though, Peisistratus's rule was hardly an untroubled one. Twice he would be overthrown and expelled from Athens by rival aristocratic factions, and both times he found his way back into power. The second time witnessed his finest return to form as a master of trickery. Seeking once more to bedazzle the masses, he found a tall and beautiful Athenian woman named Phia, dressed her up in full armor to resemble the great goddess Athena, and gloriously rode into Athens beside her in a chariot. He sent heralds ahead to announce his coming, that Athena herself was restoring Peisistratus to the city. The historian Herodotus relays the story with disbelief, barely crediting that the Athenians, of all people, in a city famous for its intellectual thought, fell for such a trick. But Peisistratus entered Athens to cheering crowds, and was swept into power once more. In his third and final reign, he never lost it again, ruling until his peaceful death in 527 BC. His son Hippias would inherit the role of tyrant, alongside Hippias's brother, Hipparchus. But they ruled without the same benevolence that had carried their father to success, and, after Hipparchus's assassination, a regime of fear and repression confirmed every warning Solon had once given. Hippias was overthrown in 510 BC, and in the turbulent years that followed, Athens would evolve and reform once again, this time at last achieving a fully democratic government built on the firm foundations of Solon's laws. These two men of ancient Athens, Solon and Peisistratus, play out an enduring argument across history between the reformer who believes in building institutions to outlast any individual, and the ambitious leader who believes that the right person with the right vision can achieve more than any system of laws. Solon gave Athens its guiding spirit of social justice, Peisistratus its pride and prosperity, while ensuring that Solon's code would stand the test of time. The classical writers who memorialized them gave credit to both men for how they reshaped their world, and the ideals of democratic participation and equality under law, however far removed from those fateful decades in the 6th century BC, still owe a debt to the unlikely pair of a wise lawgiver and a charming tyrant.